Now, the main event. I would like to introduce and call to the stage Professor Stephen Fleming, okay, from Georgia Tech. He's gonna enlighten us about the entrepreneurship and the entrepreneur modeling in his experience, which is fantastic. Professor Stephen, this is the third time he's coming here to Brazil. His heart is in Brazil. He's married to Cecilia Cissa. She's a former student of Unicamp. She studied with many of the people here. So his heart is in Brazil. Professor Stephen, the stage is on yours.
Thanks, Condo. This is a huge room. Oh, we're up. This is a huge room. Thank you for taking a beautiful Saturday and spending it indoors with us. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate the attention and the excitement. Bom dia. I do apologize. My wife speaks Portuguese. I do not. So those of you who are wearing the headsets, and to the poor people in the soundproof booth there, I speak too fast in English for native speakers of English. So for the poor translators, I will try to slow down. But I also was asked to come teach the business model canvas. You can have 2.5 hours. And I said, we teach this in an entire semester at Georgia Tech. It's 16 weeks. I said, you're good. You can do it in 2.5 hours. So I'm going to try doing the very rapid version of this. I'm going to see if I can get my remote control working. But there is a lot to cover. The slides are all going to be available, so you're not going to need to worry about taking too many notes. During part of this, we will be working on the canvases you have on the table. How many people, the big roll canvas you have in front of you, show of hands, how many people have ever seen this before? No, less than half the room. How many people have ever done one before? How many people have ever fixed one when they did it wrong? Okay, we're going to talk about that too. This is me. You've probably already read this. I'm not going to go through it in a lot of detail. I've done a lot of different things. I've been an entrepreneur. I've been a venture investor, and I work at Georgia Tech where I teach entrepreneurship. And as a matter of fact, this is part of what I teach. Got a lot of material I want to cover. Here we go. Introduction. This is what we're going to go through. There will be a short break in between, so don't get too anxious. There is a lot of material I want to try to get through. I will try to leave time for questions at the end, but we may not get to the end. So if there's something that I really don't make sense about during, it's a big room, so stand up so I'll see you, and I'll answer a question during the presentation. But if it's a big room and the lights are in my eyes, if I don't see you, I'm going to keep going. So stand up and make some noise, or I won't know to stop. This is a very brief background on Georgia Tech, if you don't know. Georgia Tech is a public university like Unicamp, a public university in the state of Georgia. We tend to rank pretty well in engineering. We are primarily an engineering and science school. We're ranked number 6. This is the 2015 numbers. The 2016 numbers look like they'll be right about the same. So when the ones in front of you are MIT and Caltech and Berkeley, you're in pretty good position. We're very proud of that. One of the things about Georgia Tech is we only teach engineering. We only teach 11 kinds of engineering. We don't do agricultural at Georgia Tech because we're in the middle of a big city. And in the areas where we do teach engineering, we're actually ranked in the top 10 in every one of those areas. So everything that we do, we're pretty good at. We're proud of that. And so that's been the case for a long time. This is my organization. We are an economic development organization, so at the end of the day, we're trying to create jobs in my state, the state of Georgia, and specifically trying to create jobs through entrepreneurship and startup activity. So we've put a lot of effort into learning how to do startups, how to make startup innovation happen. We do run one of the largest, perhaps the largest, university-connected incubator in the world. ATDC. I met Rosanna from Bahia earlier. We've been doing this for 35 years. It has won every national, international award for incubators that there is. We have about 400 companies in it right now, and they've gathered about $2 billion in venture capital investment. So it's been a very, very successful run for the entrepreneurs. This is the logo of Georgia Tech. You wouldn't know that. That's our mascot's a car. That's how engineering we are. We don't have an animal as our mascot. We have a car. So most of the companies in the incubator are not coming out of the university. They're actually coming from the community at large. So we work with anybody in the state that wants to learn about entrepreneurship, but it's all technology entrepreneurship. Now, I know we have from McKinsey a lot of folks here who are not engineers, not scientists. That's okay. The techniques work exactly the same way for any sort of a startup, whether it's engineering driven or not. We also operate something for the National Science Foundation called I-Corps or Innovation Corps. NSF is the U.S. government's investment arm for scientific research, and we've worked with them for 4 years now on taking the investment, and they invest about $7 billion U.S. per year into scientific research. And we work with them on trying to turn that research into startup companies, which is something they really had no experience in doing. So we were one of 2 universities they came to help turn this into a curriculum, which a lot of business model canvas, a lot of lean startup, a lot of evidence-based entrepreneurship has really emerged out of this world of working with National Science Foundation. So a lot of the terms you may have read about or a lot of the books you may have worked with have come out of this NSF financing. That's very briefly why I'm the one standing on stage in front of you, because I've been doing this for longer than some of you have been alive, I'm afraid. But we've done this quite a bit. I do want to start getting into detail now about the business model and specifically the business model canvas that you have in front of you. And really the first question is, what is a business model? So, how many people have ever seen this guy, Steve Blank? Great. How many of you have gone through his online class? Good. I'm glad. A few hands are up. Those of you who have not, you should. This is online at udacity.com. Udacity is one of the free online training courses. There's no charge at all to enroll. It is in English, but you can go through his 10-week-long class on entrepreneurship, which is where a lot of this material, he was also involved in National Science Foundation in putting our curriculum together. And a lot of what Steve's focus is, he's a friend, is what we now know. He keeps reusing this phrase, is what we now know, because some of us have been working in startups, in my case since 1986, in his case since about 1980. We've been doing this for a long time, and we've learned a lot. Now, in a different version of this presentation, actually the one that I gave here across town at Unicamp at Innova last year, I went through more detail from Steve's class. Because I have a different focus today, I'm not going to go through that level of detail, but Steve does it better than I do, so download his material from the web and watch it from him. But a lot of what he talks about is, if I can get that slide advance, is what is a business model. Whoops, hang on, I went too far. What is a business model? And I use this large piece of paper that you have in front of you really as a way of keeping track and keeping notes. There's nothing magic about it, but it is quite useful. And as you can see here, a business model is how a company creates value for itself while delivering products and services for its customers. So it's all about creating value. And if you're not creating value, you really don't have a company. You have a hobby, or you have a project. But you don't have a company unless you're creating value. And the business model and what we put into these 9 components, which we're going to go into in detail, is a way of keeping score to make sure that at every step along the way you are actually creating some value and moving in directions that make sense. Now, it used to be, we thought the way you did this was a business plan. How many people have ever taken a class on writing a business plan? Good, don't. I've taught classes in writing business plans. Don't go to that class. Business plans are what you do in big companies. And in big companies, they make sense. Well, I've talked to people from Motorola, from Ericsson. I used to work at Nortel. My wife used to work at IBM. Inside of an IBM, a business plan makes perfect sense because you're in a constrained environment and only certain things are going to change that. In a startup, that's usually a waste of time. It's not a good use of effort, and if I'm stepping on toes of someone in MBA school that teaches business plans, I'm sorry. We've stopped teaching them. I think you should probably stop too. But the reason is to misquote a general from World War I, no business plan survives first contact with the customer. His line was no military plan survives first contact with the enemy. But once you're out there in the marketplace and you're hacking and slashing and getting shot at, the fact that you have a very nice document detailing what was supposed to happen is really not going to be very useful. And another military man, George Patton, any plan violently executed now is better than a perfect plan executed next week. You can spend a lot of time on business plans. If you're in a startup, time is your enemy. And time is your enemy for two reasons. One is you have to eat, and your employees have to eat. So at some point you're having to pay people, and the longer you have to pay them, the more money that costs. It's just time is money, and so that makes time your enemy. The other is whatever it is you're doing, you're probably not the only one doing it, and the longer you wait, the better a chance the other person has of getting ahead of you. So spending a lot of time on business planning is like sitting back and saying, yeah, I think we can do this even better next year, but the truth of the matter is by next year you'll be dead. So don't spend that level of time. This model is a useful one because it's relatively simple. It's only 9 pieces. You have a large one there in front of you. It really came from Alex's book, Business Model Generation. How many people have read the book? Some of you have. It's in Portuguese, so you can get it. There's another version now called Value Proposition Engineering or something like that, which is worth reading. This is probably 5 years old now, but it's still a very, very useful tool. And what you'll find is these are not just left to right. You don't start in the left-hand side and work your way across, and we're going to show that in detail later. But you really start with your value proposition. You start with your customer segments as number 2, and they're numbered there. You can see numbered 1 through 9, and you go through them in order. And then as you fill later ones in, you have to iterate. I'm going to use the word iterate a lot. So if you don't know the word, it means going in circles, hopefully on purpose. So you'll iterate through this canvas, starting with the first box, but you may be changing things in the first box when you're filling out the 9th box. But if you look at the structure in general, it kind of splits left and right. It's not a formal split, but if you kind of look at it, the two sides are a little different. This is mostly stuff that happens in the background that your customer doesn't necessarily know or care about. This is stuff that happens in the foreground that is very much what your customer sees. You have to understand both sides of it. The customer doesn't have to see all of it. And so one way of looking at that is if this were a stage show, if this were a production on stage, the red is what's happening in the backstage, and the green is what's happening that the audience actually sees. And sometimes there's a whole lot of activity going on backstage that the audience has no idea how complicated all of that is. Your startup may be very much the same way. So, but what it turns out to be, it turns out to be a rationale. It turns out to be the reasoning behind how your organization creates, delivers, and captures value. And I keep coming back to this word value, because if there is no value, there's no point. There's no reason to have a company unless you're creating value that doesn't exist in some other way. And when you're looking at this model, you can use this anywhere. You can use this in IBM. You can use this in Motorola, and they do, and they use it inside of large companies. But startups are different. And this was one of Steve Blank's fundamental insights, that what we used to think is that startups were just smaller versions of big companies. And all you have to do is like a balloon, you blow it up, and it gets bigger and bigger, and you add more people, and you add more vice presidents, but that the structure of a startup and the purpose of a startup was the same as Motorola. And it turns out that's just not true. That just is not true, that we were wrong. All of us were wrong for decades, that a startup is different. A startup is a temporary organization. Every word in this is important. It's a temporary organization designed to search for a repeatable and scalable business model. I'm going to say it again, even in English. A startup is a temporary organization designed to search for a repeatable and scalable business model. So startups are searching for a business model. Once you have a company, you can deliver on that business model. And you may have the same name and the same logo and a lot of the same people, but you have become a different organization. And there's a real crystallization point going from one to the other, going from startup to a company that's executing. And many, 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 many startups screw up that transition. And I'll talk about some of those reasons why. But if you look at it in detail, there's really 4 steps. In fact, Blank's first book was called 4 Steps to the Epiphany, which you're welcome to go read. The book is a good one. And the first 2 are in this search phase, and the last 2 are in this execution phase. And you should not mix them up. You should not get them backwards. So what you find out in the discover phase, you're having lots and lots and lots of ideas, and you need to spend a lot of time validating those ideas. And we're going to talk about some techniques to do that, but really nobody cares what you think. Nobody cares what I think. What people care about is what the customer thinks. The way you find out what the customer thinks is you ask them a lot, and we'll talk about that. And as you go through that validation process, you may learn that the sort of ideas you've had are the wrong ones, and you need, this is pivoting, you need to pivot, or you need to cycle, or you need to iterate. They all mean the same thing. But you need to circle back through in the discovery process with better ideas. And you will do this for a while. You'll do it for a lot longer than today. In general, in the lifespan of getting a company started, you would spend about 1/3 of the time in this discovery and validation process, which is the startup activity, but you're not spending very much money. You haven't hired a lot of people, you haven't bought a lot of equipment, you have not encumbered yourself with any debt, you don't have a building, you don't have a lot of travel, so really you're not spending very much of your money, and you might fail. If you're going to fail, fail fast. Because a fast failure is cheap. Now this is an area, and I was challenged by this by a reporter earlier in the interviewing process. This is an area where, I'm painting with a broad brush here, European cultures, and Brazil to me is a European culture that happened to be on the wrong side of the ocean, but European cultures have issues with failure. Failure is not a bad thing. Failing to recognize and learn from a failure is a bad thing. That just means you're stubborn or stupid. But if you try something and fail quickly and go back to trying something else and trying something else and trying something else until you get it right, that's the sign of a flexible and intelligent and ultimately successful entrepreneur. And if there's any one thing that has made the U.S. successful in terms of entrepreneurship compared to Europe, compared to Latin America, compared to Asia, compared to Africa, compared to every place else, it's this attitude towards fail fast, fail cheap, fail often. Is you want to get through that failure process quickly and then move on to the next thing. And don't get stuck in failure. And don't confuse failing in an activity with you as a person being a failure. Now there's some real cultural issues there. And a lot of folks in this culture and other Latin cultures and European cultures have this real fundamental aversion to failing. There's actually some legal issues with failing. You know, in the US, if my company fails, I just go to a bankruptcy court and say, that was a bad idea, sorry, whoosh, wipe it all out, start over. All the debts go away, all the expenses go away. Here it's different. Here you've got some liability concerns. Those are cultural things that countries like Brazil and European countries need to work on to make entrepreneurship more successful. But in general, if you ignore the legal issues and if you don't spend much money, they're not that bad. This idea of failing quickly gets you to a point where at some point you've decided, yep, I validated this idea. I have validated a repeatable and scalable business model. I have validated what it is I want to go do for the next few years of my life. Then you come over here and you start creating it and building it. And only then do you start creating it and building it. And this is where so many entrepreneurs screw up, including me and some of my companies, is I want to do this. This is fun. This is the project I want to work on. This is the product I want to build. This is the code that I want to write. This is the device I want to wire up and see what happens to it. This is the fun stuff. And I would dismiss this as being irrelevant because I know that people want to buy my product. It's going to be a great product. Why should I waste all of my time going through this iterative process just in order to validate what I already know, which is that I have a great product? Because you're probably wrong. I've been wrong many times on that in startups that I've done. You're probably wrong with your idea. It's very, 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 very vanishingly rare that you can start at step 3 and proceed forward. And many, many startups try to do that. What they're doing, they're skipping the startup process. They're skipping this process of being a temporary organization trying to search for a repeatable and scalable business model, and they're trying to start off as a company, and they're trying to make it real, and they may be building it on a foundation that just doesn't make sense. I spent a lot of time on this because this is emotional, this is cultural. If you don't understand this, you don't understand why we're doing it. If you don't understand this, the exercise we're about to spend the day doing becomes mechanical and pointless. I don't want it to be mechanical and pointless. I want you to understand that there's real value to going through this iterative process, and whatever you finish up the day with your Post-its on these models is probably going to be wrong. But next week it'll be less wrong, and the week after that it'll be less wrong, and a month from now it'll be probably pretty close to right. So spend that time and understand why you're spending that time. Okay, so back to the idea of search. Startups are in search mode. And so this canvas that you've got is really a collection of, here's the fancy expensive word, hypotheses. What do you remember hypothesis from science class? Hypothesis is a Greek word for guess. So call them guesses, that's what they are. So what you're going to do, you're going to collect your guesses on this canvas, but eventually what you want to do is to get to some facts. So what you want to do is to take this canvas, which is really just a piece of paper, and use that to convert your guesses into facts. And there's a really simple way to do that. It's also really hard, but it's really simple. You're going to fill this out. You'll fill one version of this out today. And you will have a work of breathtaking fiction. There will probably not be any facts on that document today, no validated facts. But you'll have your guesses, and we're assuming you know what you're doing, so they should be pretty good guesses. And what you want to do is transform that into a collection of facts. And that takes time, and that takes effort, and that takes some work. But there's a really straightforward path to get there. I know we've got some McKinsey students here who are business and law students, but how many people at one level, undergraduate, graduate, have taken serious classes, laboratory-based classes in sciences, hard sciences, engineering? So all the engineering majors, raise your hands, yeah. Okay, so all of you at some point, whether in secondary school or in university, have learned the scientific method, and I'm going backwards. Facts. There. One more. There. Have learned the scientific method. And the fundamental insight about what we're doing with the business model canvas is that the scientific method applies to business. And nobody knew that before. This is a relatively new discovery that you can do exactly the same sort of things that you did in a laboratory and use that to create startup companies using the same mindset and the same techniques. Now, this is not a new idea. It's new to write it down this way. Because Thomas Edison knew this. Quote from Thomas Edison, "I find out what the world needs, then I go ahead and try to invent it." He always, always, always talked to customers first. And Edison was by far not the greatest scientist of his age. He was not the greatest technician of his age. He was not the greatest electrician of his age. But oh boy, would he talk to customers. And he learned from customers, and he learned from customers what they needed and how to invent it. So that has been talking about what a business model is. What I want to spend the next little time on is your thesis for your startup and how to get there. Okay, so Edison, light bulb. Everything starts with an idea. So you get an idea, and all of you have ideas. All of you are getting ideas from Unicamp licensing. You've had ideas of your own and so forth. And how do you turn that idea into this process that goes off the page now, into this four-step process that we talked about, including the startup portion, which is the first two steps. So how do you turn an idea into this startup, which is a temporary organization designed to search for a scalable and repeatable business model? Well, let's take an example of an idea. You can take your thesis is going to be really three things. And thesis is just a statement of what your startup is about. Who's your customer? What's your product? And why will they buy? Keep working on those three things, and they're all important. They're equally important. And you know, if you look at an example like this, here's an idea: a video system to capture and evaluate the behavior of children with autism. That's the sort of thing people will talk about when you say, you know, what's your idea? Yeah, that is one. Well, that's not a thesis. Let's turn that into a thesis. And here's an example of a thesis, which is, now I can't read, physical therapists will make video recordings of autistic children in classrooms to improve therapy outcomes. Now, what you're building is the same thing, but do you see the difference between the idea and the thesis? The idea is focused on the thing, you know, the video recording system. The thesis is focused on your customers and what they're going to do with it. So it really breaks down into the three: who's your customer? Physical therapists. What's your product? They'll make video recordings of autistic children in classrooms. Why do they care? Or why will they buy it? To improve therapy outcomes. So bing, bing, bing. Who's your customer? What are they going to buy? Why are they going to buy it? And you do that over and over again, and you hone the thesis for your startup. And it's really important to get that right, because if you don't have the thesis right, you don't know what it is that you're doing. So let's try another one. We developed a novel electrolyte that lowers the cost, size, and toxicity of ultracapacitors for hybrid vehicles. That's good hard engineering. So that sounds interesting. Let's figure out what that would look like as a thesis. Maybe a thesis looks like hybrid vehicle manufacturers will buy our ultracapacitors because they're safer and lower in cost than current energy storage. So you can see, and these slides are all for download, so those take a picture, have to take that many. So who's your customer? Hybrid vehicle manufacturers. Now, you may have to go test that. Maybe it's some other part of the value chain has to buy it. Will buy our ultracapacitors. Again, you need to test that. Will they really buy it, or do they have other reasons why they wouldn't do it? And then why? Because they're safer. This is your secret sauce. Because they're safer and lower in cost than current energy storage solutions. So you keep doing this over and over again, and you find you can usually use a very consistent format for thesis, which is customer segment will buy our product because of value proposition. And then when you get those three things right, you have something you can actually tell to the world about what it is that you're doing. Now the question, why do you believe it? Why do you believe it? Why should you believe it? This is the audience participation part of the course. Why would you believe your thesis? Anybody? Why else would you believe your thesis? Because it's your thesis and you're smart and you've got to be right. That's the typical answer. That gets you in trouble. That's another reason. Maybe you tested it. Let's talk about hypothesis testing. Again, scientific method, come up with a hypothesis, you test it. So thesis and hypothesis, I don't know how these translate into Portuguese, but they're all Latin, so it should come from the same place. I don't know why my slides are not advancing. Move. I'm going to get back to hypothesis testing, if my remote works. So as you can see, hypothesis and hypotheses, and I don't know how it works in Portuguese, I'm sorry. What must be true if the thesis is to be true? So hypotheses are like building blocks of a foundation. And what you want to do, you want to start laying down hypotheses. And you lay down multiple hypotheses. And once these are all stable, or more or less stable, that's a little wobbly on the side there, but when this is more or less stable, you can actually put your thesis on top of that. And if these are true, then your thesis can be true. If these blocks are faulty or are wrong, there's no way that blue box at the top is going to be stable. So one of the ways, Jim just left, talked about minimum viable product, of testing your thesis is to just build it and get it out there. That's one way of doing it. But another way of doing it is to build these hypotheses and test them because they're simpler. And you can test those in a very straightforward way. And once you've built up enough of these to prove that your tests have convinced you, then you can be reasonably confident that your startup thesis is correct. So how do you do that? First, you need to understand what a hypothesis is. Remember a while ago I said a hypothesis was a guess, so it's not proven yet, so it's your best guess. But it should be phrased as a statement of fact. You know, the sky is blue, that's a pretty good hypothesis. It should be testable. It should be non-obvious. If it's something like, you know, people would like to save money, that's not a good hypothesis because the reverse of that is stupid. People would like to waste money. No, they really wouldn't. They don't do that. That makes it reversible. It should be you go out and ask the question, you know, people want something, want X, and it might be that the people answer, yes, they do want X, or they might answer they don't want X, and you will have learned something from that. If it's so obvious that, of course, everyone wants X, you haven't developed a good hypothesis. And it shouldn't be absurd. Again, it shouldn't be that, you know, people want to waste money, or people want to hurt their children, or people, you don't like safety. You know, that shouldn't be an absurd statement. So getting a hypothesis right actually takes some work. It takes some crafting, because this is your experimental design for the testing you're going to be performing, doing again the scientific method. So what you do is you get the hypothesis as that's going to be what statements must be true. So the thesis is true. You make a prediction. I think they're going to say X, and then you test it, and you find out what questions you have to ask people to run that experiment, and then you have a trigger. You have what's a passing mark. It's exactly the same as in the chemistry lab. You know, do you meet the standard deviation of whatever the error bars of the calculation that you're doing? So it's just like doing it in a lab, except you're working with people, and people, of course, are a lot messier. And what you're trying to do is get the facts, because you have opinions. I have opinions. Everybody has opinions. We're born with opinions. We're human. And if we don't have an opinion, we'll make one up real fast. What we don't have, unless we've gone through this exercise, is the facts. So get the facts over and over and over again. Ignore what everybody else says. Ignore, you know, what the stars foretell. What are the facts and how many decimal places? Because the facts are what's going to make you build your business. And so this is why you have Post-it notes, because you're going to get this wrong a lot. But you take your hypothesis, your guess, you write it up, you make it something that fits these criteria, and you stick it on your business model canvas with the Post-it note. This is a hypothesis. Then you go out and you conduct your experiment. You go out and you ask somebody about that, and just like any experiment in science lab, you're only going to change one variable at a time. You're going to have experimental samples and control samples. You're going to have all this stuff that you have in science. And, you know, part of this would be, you know, using the same sort of thesis that we had in the previous section. Let me give an example. a thesis. Remember, it was customer segment, value proposition, will buy. So, two-income married couples will buy an automated expense tracking app because it will improve their marriage. If that's what you want to build an automated expense tracking app that's used by two people. That may be what you want to build. I don't know. How do you know if that's what you should be spending the next couple of years of your life on? How do you know if that's worth going into? Well, let's start breaking that hypothesis down, or that thesis down, start breaking that thesis down into hypotheses. Well, let's say your thesis, two-income married couples will buy an automated to improve their marriage, okay? So let's make a hypothesis, which is, animations, that two-income married couples have smartphones. Without a smartphone, they can't run an app. That's testable. You can test that. You can find out that. TIMZs, two-income married couples. You can test, they regularly buy apps, something that they do. You can test that. That they share a bank account. If they don't share a bank account, they don't have any problems over money. They can't fight over it because they don't see each other's bank accounts. And you can keep rolling this up. I think I wound up with 7 of them. My remote is going backwards. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. And so here's 7 of them. So you can just read through. Money is a source of frustration. Reducing the source of frustration will improve the marriage. Da 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 da. This is the sort of thing that you sit around a table with your partners, and you work out these testable guesses, these testable hypotheses that are not absurd, they're not obvious, they're not silly, but they're things that you can go out and find out the facts of the situation. And then you get out of the building. Whatever building you're in, the answers are not in there. Go away. When we run this for the National Science Foundation, and we do, and we run it with professors, full tenured professors that are 50 years old and have not made a mistake in 30 years. Just ask them if you don't believe them. And at 1:30 in the afternoon of the first day, we say, okay, this building is now closed, get out of here, go away, come back at 5 o'clock. And we push them out of the room and close the doors. And we don't tell them what to do. We say, go out and talk to people. Freaks them out, makes them very, very uncomfortable. But when you're doing this sort of testing, we know this. This is, I wish this weren't necessarily true, but it is true, is face-to-face is by far the most effective way of conducting these tests. Something like Skype video conferencing is about half as good. Anything else, phone calls, almost worthless. Email survey is worthless. This is because we're human beings, and we have evolved to have conversations with other human beings in the same space, transmitting information on many, many mechanisms at once, and only one of them is what we're saying. And it's what we're looking at, and how our body language is, and how attentive we are, and if we nod when you say something, or we frown a little bit when you say something, or we turn away a little bit, or we allow ourselves to be interrupted. We as human beings have hundreds of thousands of years of evolution teaching us how to have those conversations, and we're really subconsciously extraordinarily good at that. And as soon as you start filtering that through a video conference or a phone call or an email keyboard or something like that, all of those cues go away. Those cues are what you're learning from. And you're going to learn way more from the relationship you build with that person than from just the questions. And in fact, if you actually get into rapport in that conversation and you're having a good conversation, you're going to leave your questions behind and go off in other places and other directions about other questions about other topics that you didn't walk in the door thinking you were going to talk about, and that's when the real learning happens. And if all you're doing is sending an email survey, you cannot, it's theoretically impossible to learn more from the survey than what you're asking because there's no place for it to go. In a conversation, it can go anywhere. So this is unpleasant. It can be expensive. It can be time consuming. But we've proven it over and over and over again. You got to get out of the building. You got to go talk to these people. You just have to go talk to them. You know, if you're on a tight budget, Skype is better than nothing. Phone call is better than nothing. Anything less than a phone call is really not worth doing. Don't do anything by email. You're not going to learn anything. Okay, so let's take this our example of the finance kit. Here's our hypothesis. Prediction number one: half of all married people ages whatever will report that they buy 5 apps or more per year. So let's conduct an experiment of interviewing 12 married couples, and let's say that if 6 or more out of 12 says yes, that validates that hypothesis. And so then you form the questions for that. So what apps do you use? How do you buy new apps? What are some of them? You know, how often would you buy them? And this is where you let the conversation flow naturally. This is where you start learning. So you've got these questions you're going to get answers to, but you're also going to learn a lot from other things as well. So you conduct that experiment against the real world, against real people. The other thing I'm going to say, which is, again, remember how I said people like to start at step 3? One of the ways they start at step 3 is at this point they start selling their idea. Wouldn't it be great if you had an app that did this, that, and the other? Wouldn't you like that? Wouldn't you buy that from me? You're doing it wrong. You shouldn't be there yet. This should all be about asking questions about what they do now, about what they would like to do, not about what you want to do for them, not about what you want to sell for them. Don't sell yet. It's way too early for you to be selling, and it's a real easy trap to fall into at this point in the interview because you're talking to somebody who might be a customer. They have money. You want some of their money. Don't sell yet. It's too early. Because really all you've done is you've now taken this one Post-it and you've gone out and tested it against the world. Which way am I going here? And you've developed a fact. So you've conducted an experiment. How many people know who Richard Feynman is? Show of hands. Good, good. This is the same quote, just a different picture of him playing bongos because he loved Brazil. So I'm using my Brazil version of my Richard Feynman picture. If it disagrees with the experiment, it's wrong. Doesn't matter who thought of it, doesn't matter how important it sounds, doesn't matter how pretty it is, doesn't matter how smart you are. If it disagrees with the experiment, it's wrong. And this becomes an ego issue for entrepreneurs because entrepreneurs have big egos. And we think we're smarter than everybody else. We're not smarter than the world. The world is smarter than we are. We need to listen to the world. So you have now developed a fact. Congratulations, you have learned something. That was hard. Now you get to do it again. And you get to do it again. And you get to do it again. And you get to do it about 100 times. Really. We have taught this class more than 1,000 times at this point. And what we have learned, yeah, we're coming up on break. What we have learned is if you do this, getting your hypotheses right, getting your questions right, getting your tests right, and if you go out and you talk to 10 people, you will have subconsciously picked 10 people that like you, and they will reinforce your beliefs, and you will learn nothing. And if you do it to 20 people, most of them will reinforce your beliefs, and they'll tell you how smart you are and how they cannot wait to buy whatever product it is that you want to build, and you will learn nothing. And it's usually around 50 or 60 interviews that you've run out of friends, and now you're talking to complete strangers that don't care about you, and that's when the learning starts. That's when the learning starts. And so, yeah, you really have to do this process about 100 times. And we have proved, again, we taught this course 1,000 times. We have learned that the teams that do the work, the teams that really go through 100 interviews, their ratio of success is so much higher than the ones who do 15 that it's not even close. It's not even close. It's one of those things for which there's no substitute. My favorite author, Mark Twain, a man who carries a cat by the tail learns something he can learn in no other way. Same as this. There's no shortcut to doing the work of getting your hypothesis testing right, getting your questions right, getting out of the building, and going and interviewing 100 people and learning from them. And you will absolutely know more at the end of that process than you do now. And what that turns into is you've taken these guesses that you started off with, and you now, oh, excuse me, I said that wrong. So what you've now done, you have now filled in 2 elements of the canvas. You start here, you work here, and I'm going to talk about each one in detail later, but you've now got facts about your value proposition, and you've got facts about your customer segment. So you have some guesses about everything else, what's your cost structure and what's your key value, or what's your key resources and things like that, but you've actually got some facts now for your value proposition and your customer segmentation. And that was a lot of work, but you've gotten there over a space of weeks or sometimes months. And so what you've now done is you've iterated through this process for those first 2 sections of the canvas. And guess what you get to do then? Keep going. Do the same thing in the other elements, 1 through 9. All right, cool. Okay, so we just spent the first half of the morning talking about hypothesis testing, getting your thesis right, and filling in the first couple of blocks in this thing called the business model canvas. Okay, I'm going to do something for my own selfish benefit, okay? It's got nothing to do with your class, but I'm going to enjoy it. I have never seen this many copies of the business model canvas in one room at one time. So, y'all are going to hold them up, and I'm going to take a picture from the stage. So hold it up, unfold it, spread it out. This is so I can show my classes that people elsewhere actually do this. So, and I'm going to take a couple. Oh, this is so cool. Yeah, this is cool. All right, I love it. Alex Osterwalder, thank you. Alex Osterwalder, who developed the canvas, is a friend of mine, and he's going to get that picture. So he will enjoy that. So that's fun. Okay, so we're going to talk about developing the rest of that canvas. So you remember this, we talked about this earlier today. The first part of your startup is this search process, this iteration through this loop of searching for a sustainable business model, fail fast, fail often, and then you move forward to create and build. And I skipped the title of that slide, let me back up. And this process is frequently known as the lean startup process. A couple people came up to me during the break and mentioned lean startup, yes. So if you got Eric Ries's book, I did a deal with Eric a few years back. We made some money together. Eric took a lot of what he learned in that company that we did and turned it into what's called lean startup. So it's the same process. But then the canvas is from Alex Osterwalder, and it's the rationale of how an organization creates, delivers, and captures value. And the reason we call this evidence-based entrepreneurship is if you just sit and fill that canvas out in the room today, that is opinion-based entrepreneurship, because it's your opinion and the opinion of the other people at your table. And you may or may not be right. You might be right, you're pretty smart. But evidence always beats opinion, always, always. This is the Richard Feynman quote, no matter what, if it disagrees with experiment, it's wrong. So this is a way of keeping track of evidence. And it's almost like if you're in a criminal investigation, of making sure you know where the fingerprint on the gun was at what time. This is the way you track, where that fingerprint is. So we're gonna start the canvas in the middle. As I mentioned earlier, you do not work from left to right. You work in a specific order. They're arranged this way for a reason, as you'll see as we go through it. But the first, and in some cases the hardest item to get right in the canvas is right dead center is value proposition. And value proposition is not that I have a cool device and I want someone to buy my cool device, because nobody cares, truly. Value proposition is not about your idea, and it's not about your product. As a matter of fact, at this stage of development of your startup, you probably barely have an idea, and you should not have a product. And again, that was the question I think you had there in the corner about developing software, and then somebody came up during the break asking a similar question. Don't be too quick jumping into developing a product, because what you want to be focusing on with the value proposition is a problem, or a set of problems, but let's call it one. And you want to satisfy a customer need by solving that problem. Now, to get there, you may want to build a product, but you shouldn't be talking about that yet. At this stage, you really want to be focused on what's the problem, who has that problem, why is that problem real? And so again, show of hands, how many engineers in the room, engineers, scientists, computer science, medical, yeah. All of us want to talk, and I'm one of you too, all of us want to talk about our technology because it's so cool. No one cares. This is really hard for us to get through our heads because we really love our technology. We really love our code. We really love our circuit board. We really love our flying drone. We really love whatever it is. No one cares. Really, truly, no one cares. They care about their problem. They care about things, getting their jobs done so they can go home at 5 o'clock. They care about solving a problem. They care about getting rid of pain. They care about getting more joy in their life. They care about seeing, to be philosophical, as we were mentioning earlier, their dreams achieved. I mean, really, this is a motivator, right? Achieving a dream. That's more than just going home at 5 o'clock. That's doing something special. But people care about that. Your technology might be a means to get them there, but that's not that. That's not what it's about. So when you're developing your value propositions, you've got to think in the language of solving their problems. So here's some ways people screw up value propositions. I've got one of these happening right now. I got the email in the hotel room here in Campinas last night that one of the companies in my incubator is shutting down because they've gone through this process and they've realized that they were not building a product, they were building a feature of someone else's product. That happens a lot, especially in software. So they're going to have to sell themselves to another company and they'll become a feature of that other company's product. Here's one that I used to be in the venture capital business. I used to write checks for a living. And here was the distinction I would try to make when I was looking, back then it was business plans, now it would be business models. Is what I'm looking at candy, vitamins, or painkillers? And in general, that means, is this just something that's kind of fun? Is this something, a vitamin that really makes you healthier, makes your company work better? Or are you really solving a pain that somebody has a problem with and they need it fixed? And I would only invest in painkillers. In fact, I really liked investing in addictive painkillers, which basically is a painkiller with a recurring source of revenue. They have to pay you every month to keep solving that pain. That's a good investment. Candy, not so much. You don't want to invest in candy companies. Sometimes your niche is very small, and if you're only solving a problem for a very small set of customers, that may mean you can only build a very small company. Now, if your margins are high enough, and if you're happy with that, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to build a big company, you need to have a lot of customers that have a problem that you're able to solve. So here's how you do a value proposition the right way. What's the problem? In very simple language. You should not have no jargon, no abbreviations, no fancy language. It's very simple. For who's it relevant? Do they have any money? And that's been a problem with some business models traditionally, is people going after real problems with real customers that simply have no money. Education is a big one. Schools have no money. They can't buy your product. There is always, 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 I tell you 3 times, this is true, there is always competition. You do not have a company with no competition. It cannot exist. Now, the competition may be lousy. The competition may be, 3x5 legal cards and fax machines and driving around to deliver messages to people by hand, but that is competition for you. They're solving the problem in some way today. It may be a terrible way, but they're solving it in some way. So never, ever think you have no competition, because you always do. Why is this so hard to solve? Why hasn't somebody done this already? Why are you so smart? How big is it? Again, do they have any money? And the last one, and the one that, again, when I was in the venture capital business, the one that would usually trigger me is why now? What's different about the world this year or next year or the year after compared to last year and the year before that and the year before that, that right now is the right time to deliver this particular solution to solve this particular problem and create this particular value proposition? What's changed in the world? Is it that computers are more powerful? Is that everybody has a camera in their pocket now? Is that we trust Google? Kind of. You know, what has changed in the world to make this feasible now rather than the way it was before? So that's how you do a value prop. The second element of the canvas, and it's linked, is this customer segmentation. So you're solving a problem for somebody, and that's your customer segment. And your customer segments don't exist to buy your product. You exist for them. They're out there in the world, you have to serve them. And you need to learn who they are, understand what their issues are, understand what they're doing today, how they're doing it. You need to get deep, and again, I was having dinner with some entrepreneurs last night that are now selling into the advertising space, a technology product selling into the advertising space. They knew nothing about the advertising business. They were computer science geeks. And they have had to learn about how the advertising business works so they can reach in and sell into that market. And so when you're looking at a customer segment, you know, you need to be understanding their pain here. You know, what is costing them time or is costing them money? What's making them lose sleep at night? What of their current solution, and again, the solution may be a fax machine and a pickup truck. You know, what in their solution is bad right now? What do they want to see better? And you know, what are their difficulties, you know, inside the company towards getting things done? Because nobody wants to waste time. Nobody. Even a bureaucrat in a big company, they don't want to waste their time. They want to get stuff done. What's standing in their way of getting something done? And then you've got a segment. And you may think that, let's say that aerospace manufacturing is going to be my customer segment. No, that's not a segment. Maybe Embraer. Okay, my customer segment is Embraer. No, that's not a segment. That's a segment. That's Leo. He's a person. You need to go meet him. You need to talk to Leo. You need to understand what Leo does every day. You need to understand what makes Leo unhappy every day. You need to understand what Leo wants to do differently. And this is one of these 100 interviews you have to go through. You got to find this guy and give him a name, give him a face, because that's how you understand a customer segment. You cannot say the aerospace manufacturing industry needs blank. Can't say that. You can't say Embraer needs blank. It's too big. You can say Leo needs blank. And by the way, Leo has a budget to buy blank, and Leo will buy blank from me because of some other things we'll talk about a little later. But this can become actionable. This you can actually develop something real. Up here is very theoretical. And this is where the business plan versus the business model can get you in trouble, is you can spend a lot of time typing up lots of Excel spreadsheets in a business plan about what's going on in the aerospace manufacturing industry, but that doesn't give you nearly as much insight on how to build a product as why is Leo angry at his job and what would make Leo happier in getting his work done by 5 o'clock every day. Bottoms up. Bottoms up always, always, always wins over top down. Bottoms up always wins over top down. Questions there? So here's the sorts of things, again, what's keeping Leo awake at night? What are his barriers? And the barriers can be very real. Sometimes the barriers, this thing's going to cost a lot of money, and they don't have a lot of money. Well, You need to figure out a way around that. Maybe you could lease it to them. Maybe you could do a share purchase agreement. Maybe you can do a cut down version that only solves part of the problem and costs less money. You know, it's a learning curve. You know, I don't have time to train my people. Well, maybe you need to train them. Or maybe you need to put in some other mechanism to get other people in place that already know. Just resistance to change. People don't like change. People want their problem solved, but they don't do anything different. So these are the sorts of things that these interviews will actually uncover that pages and pages and pages of spreadsheets can't touch. But this is the sort of insight that can lead you to say, I want to build that thing rather than this thing. So this comes through this interview process. Other things, what makes them feel bad, things give them a headache, what are the risks? You know, do they think it's going to cost too much money? Do they think they're going to lose their job? Do they think the building is going to catch on fire? You know, what's the worst that could possibly happen? Well, be prepared to address that. I'm invested in a spaceship company, personally. We're building a spaceship. What's the worst that could happen? We could kill some people, because spaceships occasionally blow up. Guess what? We've had very detailed conversations at the board level about what's the worst that could possibly happen, and we have plans in place. Most of the plans are to mitigate the possibility to make sure that it doesn't blow up and it doesn't kill anybody, but there are plans in place that if it does blow up and it does kill somebody, we know what to do. We're not going to have to make it up as we go along. So getting into their heads, this is again, that you're not going to learn this by sending out a survey on email. You're just not. This is over a cup of coffee, or preferably over a beer, and you make friends with these people and you learn from them. Channels, third element of the canvas. Channels are really connecting. So these next two, channels and relationships, are connecting value proposition to customer segments. Channels are how you get something from you to the customer. And they can be all sorts of different ways. That can be the internet, it can be a truck, it can be a combination thereof. This is actually a chart from Steve Blank. I'm not going to go into it, but everything in what you would call the old economy had physical channels. So if you bought a car, you had to go to the car dealership and buy a car. But even if you were buying something intangible like an insurance policy, you had to go to the insurance company or you had to go to the bank or somebody, and you would have a physical channel to develop an intangible product. What you've got now is this matrix. You have now intangible products as well as intangible channels. And in this top left corner, if you have a product that's virtual and a channel that's virtual, you can scale to infinite capacity in almost no time at all. And the sorts of numbers, to give you an example, is to get the same level of penetration as color televisions. That color televisions got a certain number, and I should have this number in my head, but I don't, but a certain number of users of color TVs in 50 years. The guys who wrote Angry Birds got the same number of users in 3.5 weeks. Because there's no, you didn't have to go to the Angry Birds store to go buy a copy of Angry Birds. You just downloaded it on your phone. So this idea of virtual channels, even if what you're doing is, you know, physically delivering shoes or physically delivering books like Amazon, by having a virtual channel, you can speed up the growth of your business very, very, very fast. So it doesn't mean that car dealerships go away. It doesn't mean grocery stores go away. It doesn't mean drugstores go away. You still need the physical channels for physical goods. But understanding what these virtual channels can mean is really important if you're looking at scaling your business. And finally, customer relationships. Who do you know? Do they like you? Do you like them? Do you want to work with them? So this is really three things. This is how do you get a customer, so it's a funnel with two ends. How do you get a customer? How do you keep a customer? And how do you grow a customer? And those are really three different tasks. Sometimes that's performed by the same person in your organization. Sometimes these are three different people. Sometimes these are three different groups of people, depending on how big your company is. But you're doing very different things by getting a customer, in other words, convincing someone to take a risk and buy your product. Keeping them means they have to like what you're doing. And then growing is saying, wow, I want more just like you. Can you help me find more customers? Can you yourself become a bigger customer by buying more of my product or buying adjacent products? So these are the three verbs you need to work your way through with customer relationships. A lot of that's going to be based on your experiences and who you've worked with in your career, the other people on your team who they've worked with, and sometimes you need to hire people that have these experiences, that have worked with these people and know how to go forward. But building those relationships is going to be determinant as to whether, I can't reach that high, my pointer's in my pocket, but you've got the value proposition, you've got the customer segment, but are you actually going to be able to build the relationships to get to them? And that's a people thing, that's not a technology thing. Because the customers are Leo. Do you know Leo? How many Leos do you know? How many of them can you call up and say, hey, can we have a beer? Can we talk about something? These are the sorts of relationships. Even if Leo is not the one writing the check may be rewritten, depending on the size of the company, by the CEO or the chief technology officer, or the chief marketing officer of the corporation. That may not be Leo, but Leo's going to have a big impact on where that check goes. You have to know him. We've gone through 4 boxes on the canvas. It's the top right corner. These 4 are hard. It's all hard, but these 4 are particularly hard. But these 4, if you've done this right, you now developed a value proposition, you've identified your customer segments very specifically, you've identified the channels you're going to need to get there, and the relationships you're going to have to fill those channels. This is usually a pretty good point to sit back and think for a while. Because you've talked to a lot of people, hopefully 100. You've talked to a lot of people. You've probably learned a lot. And it's probably time to think, rather than continuing on this path, is it time to pivot? Is it time to make a change? Is it time to do something different? And sometimes the answer is no. It's all working. Great. Full speed ahead. Let's keep going. But this is usually about the point where if there's something fundamentally wrong with your business or your business model, you probably figure it out about this point. And this is where you have to have serious conversations with your partners. If you have investors already, I hope you don't yet, but if you have investors already, it's time to have serious conversations with your investors. It's time to have serious conversations with some of the Leos in the world that you've made friends with, some of the customers, about what is it they need and how could you solve it. And sometimes the answer is Winston Churchill. Success consists of going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm. This is what I was mentioning much earlier in the day, that failing isn't failure. Failing means that didn't work. You've learned a lot, and maybe it's time to go forward to something else that does work, and you start the process over. That doesn't feel good, okay? You know what feels worse? Building up a company and then having to lay off everybody and put them out of jobs because you didn't do this early enough. Because at this point, it's you and a couple of friends. Later on, it's going to be you and a couple of friends and 100 employees and 3 or 4 investors, and you're going to have to tell all of them that it didn't work, and that all of them are out of jobs, or all of them are out of money if they made an investment. And then they're going to ask that question, well, didn't you know this before? And if at some level deep down you knew before that it wasn't going to work, and you kept going anyhow because I think I can push hard enough, I think I'm smart enough, I think I can make this happen, and then you fail and you put 100 people out of work and you lose the money of your investors, that's a bad feeling. I know I've been there more than once. It's a bad, bad feeling. admitting up front that, this wasn't exactly the right answer, but in the process I have learned something that's better. We've taught this course, the National Science Foundation, about 1,000 times. So we have some statistics on what works. So the audience from NSF is professors and graduate students in research universities that have gotten money from NSF. At this point, again, about step 4 of the canvas, at this point, we do a real check with them. It's like, are you going to go forward and do this? And it turns out that of the 1,000 teams we've taught, half of them say, no. We came in the door thinking we had something that the world needed, and after 100 interviews, we've convinced ourselves that we were wrong. And half of them just stop. About 40% of them say, what we walked in the door, that was stupid. I can't believe how dumb I was 3 months ago that I thought that was a good idea. But now, 3 months later, I've learned so much by talking to 100 Leos that now we've got something that I feel really good about. And they go forward and make that successful. And about 10% of the time, they say, yep, what we thought we had was the right idea, and we're going to keep on going. And sometimes that's because they were right, and sometimes that's because they were lucky, and sometimes that's because they're too darn stupid to take advice. And all of those happen. But what's really been amazing to me is that 40% who've said, I thought I had a good idea, I've learned better in this process, and I have a better idea, and I'm going to keep going, but I'm going to do something that's a little different than what I originally thought I was going to do. So this process changes things. It really does. If you do it right, this process changes things. It's really important. Let's keep going. So now, if you decide this is the one you're going to do, we start doing some of the stuff that looks a little more like traditional business planning. For example, what are my revenue streams? So, who's going to pay for this? What's the value? What's the model for making money? This is when you have to start getting into pricing, you have to start getting into cost, you have to start getting into margins, you have to start getting a lot of this sort of stuff. But, the basic idea here is, as I said, there is always competition. They're always solving their problem in some way, even if it's a terrible, stupid way. There's always competition, and they're spending something for that solution today. Would they be willing to spend the same amount, or maybe a little more, or maybe a little less? But what are they willing to spend on your solution and building a model so that you make money off each of those segments? So this is value-based pricing, not cost-based pricing, and trying to figure out, what is this worth to some customer? Key resources. This is you and your people. What's magic about you? I said there were a couple, when I was in the venture business, there were a couple of key questions that I always wanted to know before I wrote a check. And one is, why now? What is different about the universe right now, today, or next year that makes this startup company a valid investment? The other would be, why you? Because there's 7 billion people on this planet, and a whole lot of them have a lot of good ideas. And what is there about you, whether it's your history or whether it's your patents or your connections or whatever it is that you've got, or maybe, maybe you happen to own the right warehouse in the right location. I mean, that's an asset. But what are the intellectual, physical, and other assets of this enterprise that you're beginning to kick off that's going to make this business model work? At this stage, when you're in this block, you're probably going to identify some assets you don't have, that you need to have. And maybe it's as simple as you need some new servers. Well, those are cheap. Or maybe it's as complicated as you need a patent that you don't own. And you know the people that do, and they don't like you. Well, that's a bigger problem. Or maybe it's, hey, there's 4 of us on the team, and 3 of us are absolute geniuses with writing code, and 1 of us is pretty good at going out and selling it, but none of us can handle finances. So maybe one of the missing assets is a financial resource, as well as an employee or as a service or what have you. But this is where you're identifying, what's special about your company, because that's one of the questions investors are going to ask, and I'll get to that in the second part of this presentation. Partners, startups are a team sport. Nobody does this by themselves. So you need to be able to write down who are you working with, what sort of partnerships do you have with them, what sort of relationships do you have with them? Is it going to be a joint venture? Are they going to be a supplier to you? Are you going to be a supplier to them? Are you going to be a contractor? What's the relationship with that partner? And again, what's in it for them? Because they're not doing this to make your business successful. They're doing it to make their business successful. They have their own canvas, and you fit in as one of their partners. They should have their own canvas, but the end result is different. So you need to understand how they fit in. Number 8, key activities. What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? What is it that you need to be working on to make this business work? What are the most important things? And whether that's managing your supply chain, or whether that's writing the right code, or whether we mentioned during the break, if you're in the life sciences, there's regulatory issues. You have to get regulatory approval. Whether you're trying to solve a production problem, if it's a physical, like a factory or an agribusiness product, what are those key activities that you need to do to make this thing successful? And the last one, and it's not saving the best for last, but it is the last one, is cost structure. And if you go to a business planning class, that's the first one. And everything's about cost structure. And that's doing it backwards. So you can't analyze your cost structure until you understand the rest of the canvas. What are the activities? Who are the partners? What are the channels? What are your key value propositions? You have to know all of that first before you can actually go through and figure out what are your costs. Now, a huge chunk of the cost in most startups is going to be people, your salaries that you pay. So you need to understand, what people are you going to be adding? What sort of backgrounds do they have? What do those people cost? How much are you going to have to pay them to get them? How do you get them away from where they're working now? But then there's other factors. If you're a production business, you'd have cost of goods sold, whatever your raw materials are, cost of the capital to buy the machinery that you're working with in the factory, whatever it happens to be. All of that's really important, but all of that comes last. Because if you start working on that stuff first, maybe you're actually solving the wrong problem. You've got to get to the other parts of it first before you can get to cost structure. These boxes are helpful. They're not magic. One of the reasons all these boxes exist is so that you can actually have developed a body of facts. And again, facts are important. But you developed a body of facts. And you not only have a body of facts, you have a structure in which you can communicate about these facts. And there's lots of people you have to communicate with. The first is yourself, getting your own thoughts clear. The second is your team and the people you're trying to recruit to your team. And having these facts arranged in a distinctive, understandable array, like the business model canvas, is a way that you can tell that story to your own team so everyone's working on the same problem in the same way. Because it's amazing, you get to about 4 or 5 people in a company, and they can go off in different directions, even if they're all physically in the same room. There's a great line by Jeff Bezos of Amazon, that if you cannot feed your development team with 2 pizzas, it's too big. it's a nice line. It may or may not be true. There's some things that do take a lot more people. Building spacecraft takes more than 6 people, trust me. Building IBM mainframes takes more than 6 people. But when you get beyond 4, 5, 6 people, internal communications becomes key. And it's really good to have this collection of facts to come back to, and you find out somebody's doing something and you say, well, is what you're working on, is that one of our key activities? And you can go back to the list of key activities. And you might realize, no, actually it's not. Well, then you need to have the conversation, why are we doing that? Or, gosh, this came up during the break just a minute ago. Somebody says, we were out, trying to interview a customer, just trying to find out what they needed, and they threw money at us to develop a product for them. Well, now what? Well, that's a good problem to have, but you need to be very careful to figure out, did what you just commit to actually fit this model, or did you just set up a sidebar consulting business, which is separate than what you thought you were going to build? And this sort of discipline of getting these facts in an orderly manner is a really good way to keep you and the people closest to you, and maybe your investors if you have them, all communicating using the same vocabulary to mean the same things, to go in the same direction. Because it is so easy to lose track of what you're originally trying to do once you're in the day-to-day of building the product or whatever it is that you're doing for your business. It's really easy to lose focus. This collection of facts keeps you focused. So you're never done with the canvas.
I'm not kidding, daily, about how does this fit? Is this part of our value proposition? Does this fit with our customer segmentation? Does this fit in the channels we've chosen? This is a really useful tool for internal keeping on track. Questions on that? We're about to switch gears. Once you've got the story that you can understand, once you've got the story on the canvas that your team can understand, it actually becomes a really useful tool for telling your story to other people. And you will tell your story to other people all the time. I have called my job in startups occasionally storyteller in chief.
Because that's what I find myself doing. How many people have heard the phrase elevator pitch? About half of you, okay. This is a famous phrase that if you happen to be getting in an elevator of an office building and you recognize that the person standing next to you is someone who could be a key partner or a key resource for your business. Maybe the classic is an investor, but maybe they could be a supplier, or maybe there's somebody you want to hire as a recruit, but that you're in an elevator with them for about 30 seconds. How do you tell a story in 30 seconds that gets their attention? That's called an elevator pitch, and it's something that you practice, and you have to get good at it. It doesn't come automatically. It does not come automatically. You have to craft it, you have to be careful, you have to be good at it. Other environment, how many people go to events like this? Networking events for startups, for entrepreneurs of various sorts. And that's kind of a crowded room. And in both cases, whether it's the elevator or that crowded room, you get this question. So what do you do? That's a normal human, conversation starter. And it's amazing how many startups screw up the answer. Because they start using jargon, they start using abbreviations, they assume too much knowledge on the part of the other persons, they dive in at the wrong level, they skip steps, and by the time I get off that elevator, I don't ever want to see you again. Let's go back to your thesis. Remember your thesis? You had a thesis for your business. Your thesis was customer segment will buy product because of value proposition. That's a really good start on answering the question, what do you do? Here's one way you can do it. Start with a really strong opening sentence. And in a network environment, it may be that one sentence is all that you get. Because you're not there to teach them everything there is to know about your business in the next 30 seconds. You're there to get enough of their attention that they're willing to spend more time with you, either right away or to schedule something for later, or to take an action item to schedule a meeting, some future date. Getting that sentence is hard. You can make up your own. This is a good one. This is one we've honed over a lot of time. And I'm going to go through it in detail, but you need to be able to fill in these blanks. My company name, use the name, tell them what it is developing something to help someone solve some problem with some secret sauce. And if the secret sauce doesn't translate into Portuguese, that means something special about your business. So you have 5 blanks to fill in here. And if you can get these 5 blanks filled in a very efficient way, you can build a really strong sentence that gets drilled into your subconscious and into the subconscious of everybody that works for your company. So if you're awakened out of a cold sleep by somebody throwing a bucket of water in your face and ask, what do? You should be able to recite this. Then get up and punch them. But you should be able to do this as a reflex. You shouldn't have to think about this. You should have practiced this to the point where you can say it without stopping for breath. So let's talk, well, and again, the thesis fits in here. Product, customer segment, value proposition. That's 3 of the 5 is out of your thesis. So this sounds very simple. It's not. This takes a lot of work. It's worth doing the work, but you can tell when someone has done this work because when you ask them that question, you get a crisp, clear, appropriately leveled answer that answers the question very, very crisply and makes me want to learn more. Because, and again, this wearing my venture capital investor hat, that's really all you want from me is you want me to learn more. Because I'm not going to write a check based on a 30-second interaction. I'm going to have many, many meetings with you. But let's go through them. Company name. All the good names are gone. All the good domains are gone. Too bad. Do something anyhow. It should be somewhat pronounceable, somewhat memorable. You should be able to spell it. And you should be able to find it on Google. Now that sounds silly, but I had a company once, a really good company. The company was called Video Networks, because that's what we built. We built Video Networks, and we were the first out there, so we got the name, Video Networks. If you just Google the phrase Video Networks, do you have any idea how many hits you get? And we weren't at the top of that list. So you need to make something up. It shouldn't be too silly. It should work in other languages, but getting the name right is worth some effort. And if everybody around the table is an engineer or a scientist, you're the wrong people to be picking the name. Go get some help. Because we are terrible. That's why I named the company Video Networks. It's what we did. We built Video Networks. It's a good name, right? It was a terrible name. So get some help with the naming. Now, we're doing something. This is where you've got to make sure you're not using jargon and not using adjectives. But you've already done the hard part here because you've got your value proposition. The canvas comes back. The canvas comes back. So you take your value proposition, you boil it down into a very short phrase. We're developing something. And then again, helping someone. This is Leo. We're going to help this particular sort of buyer very specifically solve a problem. So we've already got the problem. That's your value proposition again. So first you've got what it is, so you've got your value prop, what you're going to solve. And at this point you can hint at having a revenue stream. You don't have to say what the revenue stream is at this point. That's not appropriate. This is your first introduction to somebody. But it's always nice if you can say that solving a problem that's worth a lot of money to somebody. Secret sauce is this part of the canvas. That's who you are and what you're doing. So that's what makes you special. That's what makes you different. So now you've said my company, XYZ is developing something to help someone solve some problem with secret sauce. You can say that with one breath. It takes just a few seconds to say it. And first off, you've answered the question, which is really irritating as heck when you ask somebody, so what do you do? And after a minute and a half, I still don't know. That happens a lot. But also, if you've done this right, you've got me interested in spending some more time with you. And that's really the objective, is to learn some more. What you really want to do is get to a meeting. And for good or for bad, in the culture that we live in, meetings mean slides. How many people think you're really good at putting slideshows together? Anybody? Yeah, I'm glad you didn't raise your hand because you're probably wrong. Most people are really bad at this. I'm not great at it. I'm better than some. There's a tool out there called PowerPoint. How many people use PowerPoint on a regular basis? PowerPoint makes you stupid. There's actually an academic paper out there, The Cognitive Dissonance of PowerPoint. I encourage you to look it up. And it is a well-researched and footnoted paper about how PowerPoint makes you stupid. In fact, the author goes through in great detail of a particular PowerPoint presentation from 1986 when PowerPoint was just beginning to take over the world, and how PowerPoint brought down the space shuttle. Because of the way the thoughts were organized by just using the bullet tools of PowerPoint, of bullet, sub-bullet, sub-bullet, sub-sub-bullet, the fact of a particular set of conditions that happened to the Challenger, which was the shuttle that went down in '86, in advance, they knew that if this condition happened, everybody would die. And there were PowerPoint charts that showed that, but they showed it in such language, in such jargon, with so many abbreviations, and by the time they got down to the 5th sub-bullet in such small print, it did not jump off the page that everybody dies. PowerPoint makes you stupid. It is a useful tool. Try to use it well. One of the best things you can do to make PowerPoint work better for you is use very few words, use very big fonts, take out the complexity, and have lots of photographs. Let me show you the wrong way to do it. This is a real slide developed by the U.S. taxpayer, or by the U.S. government at taxpayer expense on Pentagon procurement. I'm sure somebody spent months putting that slide together. And I bet you there's a mistake about right here. This is an abomination before God and man. This is a horrible, horrible thing to do to anybody. And yours may not be this bad, but I've seen startups that are almost this bad. Because they want to get everything on the slide. They want to get everything down on that piece of paper because somebody might need to know that level of detail. And by gosh, they don't want to be accused of oversimplifying the problem. That is my reaction when I see slides like that. And PowerPoint will let you build those slides. Here's another one. Assume this slide conveys critically important information about your company. Unfortunately, it is too wordy. People who create slides tend to put every word that they're going to say on their slides. You've already read this. This is horrible. This is horrible. Don't do this. Don't do this. I speak pretty fast. I speak at about 150 words a minute. Most people are between 120 and 150. I read really fast. I read at about 1,200 words a minute. So if you put this slide up here and you start reading it to me, about the time you get to people who create slides tend to, I've finished. And if all you're doing is telling me what's written there, I learned that pretty rapidly. And after the third slide like that you do, once it goes up, I look, I read, and then what am I doing? I'm checking email. I'm not paying attention to you. Don't do that. Don't do that. That's a really bad thing to do. That's 30-point text. Anything smaller than that's wrong. I don't care if it fits in your Excel spreadsheet. I don't care if it fits on the axis of a chart. I don't care if it's a label of some little, widget on a box someplace. Don't care. Anything smaller than that's wrong. Why? Investors tend to be older and our eyes are bad. We can't read it. And if after a couple of slides go up with print that's too small for me to read, I can read my email. I'll do that instead. I'm going to ignore you. Don't let me ignore you. Don't be that. And the tools are there to help you not be ignored. So everything there is too small. Keeping it short, which I am not doing today, but we're going to be on time. Keeping it short. Typically, a meeting slot is about an hour. That usually means 55 minutes because I'll be late. If you have 55 minutes to talk to somebody that you've gotten a meeting, and this could be with an investor, this could be with a customer, this could be with a supplier, this could be with any sort of partner that you're trying to get something out of, you should plan to have a presentation that lasts about 20 minutes. And by the way, you should rehearse that presentation so you know it takes about 20 minutes. Because what you really want to be doing in that meeting is having a conversation. Because for every minute that you're talking to a slide, that's a minute in which you are not learning anything. Because you've already seen your slides. Now, there needs to be some information conveyed to the audience because you're trying to teach them something or convince them of something or, get their attention about something. But in general, you don't want to just be conveying information, or you could just record yourself on YouTube and put it on the web and let the guy click on it at his desk. If you want to have a meeting, the information needs to go both ways, and I'm not going to learn when I'm presenting slides. I'm going to learn when I stop talking about my slides and you start talking to me. So you want to keep it really short and leave lots of time for questions and answers. The time you will never have, trust me, you will never have the situation where you finish your slides and they say, okay, thank you, goodbye, and you've not had enough Q&A to fill the time. There'll always be Q&A, questions and answers. There'll always be questions and answers to fill that time. So leave the time for it. What you don't want to do is to be racing to finish your slides and then exactly at the hours, like you put your last slide up and they say, thank you very much, my next meeting is here, goodbye. Because then you haven't learned anything. You may have taught them something, but you haven't learned anything. Make sense? So how long should a presentation be? About 20 minutes. How many slides? About 13. You can do it in 10. 13 works. You don't need any more than 13. And the neat thing is, if you've done the business model canvas the right way, you've already done these slides. You just didn't know it. So let's go through them. Okay. Title slide. Stupid mistake. Don't leave off your contact information. If I like this, I may want to send it to somebody else. And if they like it, they may want to get in touch with you. And if you don't have at least an email address and a website, and probably a phone number and maybe a Twitter handle, but those are kind of in decreasing order, but at least an email address and a website, they're not going to know how to get in touch with you. So put that on there. Name of your company, a logo if you've got one, don't worry if you don't have one, contact information, and maybe just one little phrase about what it is you do just to get their attention. But then, the next one is team. You want to start off explaining who are you and why are you here? Why are you in front of this person? Because you're going to get to the questions about team anyhow, so you might as well put it up front. And there's going to be one of two things. Either your team is really strong and you want to brag about that up front and you want to get their attention up front, or your team has got some holes in it and you want to be honest about that up front and say, that's one of the things I want to fix. I need a new finance person, or I need a hypersonic aerodynamicist, or I need a whatever the heck it is that I need to build my business. But this all comes out of key resources. So you've already done the work there. Put it on the slide. Next one, the overview is really this iteration you've gone through, that you've completed the search, or if you have, maybe you haven't yet. If not, be honest. But if you've completed the search, and at your point where, my pointer, create there, the third element there, you're at the point of trying to create, explain the search process that you went through and what you learned. Next one, 3 are kind of together, is really, remember we talked about the top right quadrant, this is where you do your check as to whether you need to pivot or not. Those together really become the problem, solution, and your value. And as you talk about them in that order, you did the canvas with value proposition first, but in the presentation, you want to talk about problem, solution, and then the value. Because in the presentation, you're actually trying to convince somebody that you're the right one to solve it. Secret sauce, again, is whether it's your team or whether it's your patents or whether it's the fact that you own the right piece of equipment or whatever, but whatever it is, that's your secret. And then the advantage is, again, how do you map that from value proposition to customer? So you take that information and put it on a slide because, again, you've already done the hard work of doing the canvas. Strategy, that's really these two. How do you do channels and how do you customer relationships? That's really what strategy is all about. Models, the whole thing. Models, how do you make money? Why is this a business? Why is this a business that somebody would, I'm speaking as if you're talking to an investor, but it could be to any sort of partner. But if it is an investor, why is this a business somebody would want to invest in? Numbers only fit on one slide. It's going to be your projections. 3 years is enough. 5 starts getting pretty fictitious. And if you give me 7 to 10 years, you're lying to me. So 3 is enough. And really, the first year ought to be pretty solid. You kind of ought to know what that looks like. And years 2 and 3, you can have some different scenarios. If we get this amount of investment, then year 2 looks like this. And if we don't get that investment, year 2 looks like half of that. That's okay. But you only get one slide for numbers. Only one for financial numbers. Only one slide for that. And then the last real slide before the closer is what do you need? Because you're having this meeting for a reason. You need something. Maybe you need money. Maybe you need a recruit. Maybe you need a distribution channel. Maybe you need a new truck. Whatever it is that you need, ask for it. Because again, you've identified that by going through the canvas. So ask for it in your pitch. And the last one is your magic sentence again. My company name is developing something to help somebody solve some problem with secret sauce. And you leave that on screen. Mistake a lot of people make is they'll put the last thing on the screen as questions or thank you, both of which are polite. But if you're now 25 minutes into your 55-minute time slot, that's going to be on screen for the next half hour. Questions? No. Use it. This is subliminal marketing. My company name is developing something to help someone solve some problem with secret sauce. Leave it on screen. It'll just stay there for the next 30 minutes. And you're done. If you do the canvas right, getting your pitch is actually very, very straightforward. If you do the canvas wrong, getting the pitch can take a lot of time. Okay, so what have I learned doing this for 27 years? I've been hanging out in the startup world in various roles. As an entrepreneur, as an investor, now as an educator in entrepreneurship. Somebody asked me during the break, I took my jacket off. I wear this button. That has the valley with a circle and slash across it, which means many things. And I can use this button to start a lot of different conversations. But it fundamentally means not Silicon Valley. Now, that doesn't mean I don't like Silicon Valley. I love Silicon Valley. I've got a lot of friends there. I've made some money there. It is an amazing collection of talent and wealth and creative juice that's really unmatched anywhere on the planet. And it's a great place. But I don't live there. And neither do you. And that's okay. There is a mindset among some entrepreneurs that is somewhat pitiful. That is, oh, if only we were in Silicon Valley, fill in the blank. The streets are paved with gold. Or there's programmers standing on every street corner looking for jobs. Or everyone drives Ferraris or Teslas or whatever it is, because they've all had initial public offerings of their stock. Or I could build a management team in a weekend at a soccer game. And some of that's even true. But that's no excuse. That's no excuse to be sitting in Campinas or Sao Paulo or Atlanta or New York City or Singapore or anywhere else and saying, oh, if only I were in Silicon Valley, things would work so much better. Well, you know, airplanes exist. And if you really believe that, you should move. If you believe that there's a way to do it differently, you should do it here. And I've made the commitment in my career to build startups in Atlanta, which is not Silicon Valley. But even though we don't have the same resources Silicon Valley has, we have enough resources. And so does Campinas, and so does Sao Paulo, and so does Rio, and so do other places. There's enough resources for any of you to build successful companies. What there has not been as much of is the mindset and the attitude, which can be replicated anywhere. And you don't have to have billions and billions of dollars of venture capital and thousands of successful companies all listed on the New York Stock Exchange. You don't need to have that to build successful startups. There are some things you do need to have, but you can have them anywhere, and you can have them here. And part of that is what we can learn from Silicon Valley, because even though we're not there, we should learn from it. How many people recognize this? I heard it from up here first. HP. Yeah, this is the original garage. This was Bill Hewlett's garage where Hewlett-Packard was formed. And that really kicked off, whoops, I skipped my picture. And that really kicked off the growth of what we now know as Silicon Valley. It started right after World War II, 1947, 48, in that era. And that kicked off literally $1 trillion worth of wealth creation. It has been the largest and most concentrated creation of wealth in the history of mankind. And it's all happened in the last 60, 70 years in one very geographically constrained part of the world. And there's a lot of reasons why it worked there. It's not magic, and it's not unique. But there were some things together that came together there that had not come together in most places in the world. I teach an entire class on this one slide. I'm going to try to leave some time for questions. I'm not going to go through it in too much detail, but I will mention each of these briefly. Free markets. Capitalism works. It's really hard to find successful entrepreneurs in a socialist economy. Sorry. Lula may not like that, but free markets work. Availability of capital, of investment. It doesn't have to be a lot, but there has to be some. You don't need billion-dollar investment funds, but you need thousands of dollars and tens of thousands of dollars. You don't necessarily need billions. Intellectual property protection, Brazil's good here. You need to have the ability to control what you create and harvest the value from what you create without worrying about somebody just stealing it. This is where China's running into trouble. Because China's doing a lot of these things right. They fundamentally, at an ethical level, don't believe in intellectual property protection. They believe if you can pick it up, you can have it. And guess what? People are beginning to realize that doesn't work. Silicon Valley has always had a very collaborative culture. A lot of it grew up at the same time as the counterculture with, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. There was not the hierarchical, militaristic, command and control economy on the West Coast that you had on the East Coast. And so this sort of collaborative culture where people from different companies would come together to help each other just because the project was cool, that led to an immense amount of creativity being unleashed, which you had all the same brain power in Boston, but in Boston, if you worked for IBM, you couldn't talk to digital equipment and you couldn't talk to AT&T. You had to be very, very constrained. And that sort of collaborative culture turned to be important. Flexible career paths. People get bored. Smart people get bored faster than dumb people. So there needs to be a way where someone can reinvent themselves every few years and say, yeah, I've been a database expert for the last 5 years, but I'm going to go start working on color vision theory. There's not many places in the world you can do that. Silicon Valley turns out to be one. There are others. But in general, if you pigeonhole people, if you constrain people too early in their careers to one particular path, then it becomes very difficult for them to continue growing through the life of a full career. Welcoming outsiders and immigrants, there's some problems in the United States with this right now. We have an immigration challenge in front of us, is that there's a lot of people, in senior levels of government that don't want any more immigrants. I think they're stupid. If bright people want to come to my country and pay taxes, I want them to come to my country and pay taxes, but there's some places that don't like that. This is where Japan fails. It's darn near impossible to immigrate to Japan. And so they're stuck with the people who are born on their island. Now, there's 60 million of them, and they're pretty smart. But not all the smart people are born Japanese. And if they don't figure out a way to open up and let outsiders come in and have a piece of the pie and have a piece of the economic growth, they're going to continue to stagnate. And they've proven that. Meritocracy. Cisa's Brazilian, my bride. She's taught me the phrase, friends of the king. It's very dangerous if the way people rise through a society is because who they're friends with and who they went to school with and who they're related to. And one of the great things that happened in the Valley is, for a lot of reasons, it was actually far enough away from some of the hierarchical parts of American culture that meritocracy flourished, and the best did actually rise to the top. I've talked about failure a couple times. Acceptance of failure is a learning experience. Again, that failing does not mean you are a failure. Failing means you have failed once or twice or 3 times. And hopefully you've learned from that. When I was writing checks as a venture investor, when I was interviewing people, I would ask, tell me your greatest failure. And it sounds like one of these kind of tricky, standard job interview questions, have you quit beating your wife? Tell me of your biggest failure. And you're supposed to turn it around and tell me, well, actually I've only had great successes and here's why. No, I want to hear about your failure because I want to make sure you've had one, because everybody's got at least one in them. And if you hadn't failed yet, it's probably your turn. And I want you to do it with my money. I want you to have had a failure and to have learned from that before I invested, because I want you to be wiser, and you learn wisdom through failure. And sometimes, some of us are pretty stubborn. Sometimes it takes repeated failure. And the last one that I highlight here, because of the environment, is there needs to be a continuous replenishment of the ecosystem. And that's both smart people and smart ideas. And that's the role that a research university plays. That's the role Georgia Tech plays in my ecosystem in Atlanta. That's the role that Unicamp and McKinsey can play here. The school in Southern Minas Gerais that I don't remember the name of, I apologize, but the third school that's represented here. That's the role that the university can play, is you're always bringing in smart new people who have smart new ideas and who don't necessarily know that it can't possibly work that way because they're too young and naive to know that it can't possibly work, and so they go ahead and do it. And that's the role of a university. So universities play a key role in one of these ecosystems. And my argument, which I feel pretty strongly, is any place on the planet, in the middle of the Sahara Desert, if you make these things available, your entrepreneurial ecosystem will flourish. Anywhere. Anywhere. A rock in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. If you make this stuff happen, you will get a successful entrepreneurial ecosystem. And as a matter of fact, probably the closest example of that right now is Singapore, which is a rock in the Pacific or the Indian Ocean, which has got absolutely no natural resources whatsoever. But they're doing this, and they're building a very spectacular entrepreneurial economy. There are counterexamples of places that are doing parts of it, not doing all of it, and they're not doing as well. For example, I mentioned China. China is not doing well in the entrepreneurial startup economy. They're doing great with state-funded businesses that can spend billions of dollars. But startups are running up against both the issue here of intellectual property protection and also running up against this issue of meritocracy. Is that sometimes, you don't win because you're the smartest, sometimes you win because your uncle's in the party. Communist Party. That's becoming a capping event for China. But I believe any place can do these. I've spent my 20 years of my career trying to do this in Atlanta. I'll spend the next 20 years trying to do this in Atlanta. This can happen in Campinas, this can happen in Sao Paulo, this can happen anywhere, but you have to do all of them. You can't just pick and choose. Does it really work? This is the example I use. This is not a business model canvas. It may look like that because of this class. This is a wall in my office at Georgia Tech. Every one of those Post-its is a startup company coming out of Georgia Tech. There's about 100 of them. Every one of those Post-its is a company. Because we've tried to implement that sort of ecosystem that really welcomes the sort of innovation that takes itself forward as a startup company. And we've tried to put the resources in place, not just financial, but personal and physical and emotional sometimes, trying to put all the bits and pieces in place to make these companies successful. And we have had extraordinary success. We're actually ranked #2 in the world right now. And there's another university in Texas that ticks me off, but that's okay. I have friends there. But we're ranked #2 in the world for creating startup activity out of university because we're implementing what's on that list.
No, I'm done. I'm sorry. Thank you. Here you go.